If you're watching this video suffering in silence at the hands of an abusive man, I want you to know, you're stronger than you think. And if I, at 86 years old, managed to change my destiny after decades of abuse, trauma, and suffering, you can too. Good morning, my loves. My name is Anna Flowers from Canton, but everyone here in Canton, Missouri knows me as Miss Annie. I'm 86 years old today, and every line on my face tells a story. But I've come here to tell one in particular. A story I've kept for 12 years, never sharing it with anyone. But after receiving so many messages from women asking for strength, asking for courage, I decided it was time to tell my truth. Because sometimes we need to hear that we're not alone, that others have been through the same hell and came out alive. If you're watching me now, leave a comment saying what city you're from. It moves me to know that my voice can reach so far, bringing hope to women I've never met. And if my story touches your heart, click the like button and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. My granddaughter says this helps more women find these stories of survival. I was born in 1938 in a small house along the Mississippi River, when Canton was just a dot on the map where the county fair was the biggest event of the year. My father was a fisherman. My mother made quilts, the kind of handmade crafts that tourists loved. We were 6 kids sharing beds in the same room, eating fish and cornbread every day, but our hearts were full of joy when September came and the town turned into a festival. I met Sebastian in 1954 on a night at the county fair. I was 16, he was 22, arriving all-important in his father's car, old Orlando Canoe. The Canoe family was one of the oldest in Canton, owners of a shipping business that ran boats to St. Louis, people of means, respected. Orlando Sr. was a widower, having lost his wife when Sebastian was 10, never remarried. He raised his son alone, the two so close they were like 2 peas in a pod. Sebastian won me over with a poem he made up on the spot, right there in the middle of the crowd. Brown-eyed girl from the river town, my heart's become a boat, sailing on your smile, Anna Flowers steals my vote. Everyone applauded, I turned red as a tomato, but inside my heart had already chosen. We married 2 years later in 1956. It was a society wedding, church full, reception at the country club, gifts even from the mayor. My humble family mixed with Canton's elite, but Orlando Sr. made sure to treat everyone well. He was an educated man, spoke softly, always in his Panama hat and pressed white suit. Sebastian idolized him. Every gesture of his father's was law. Every word was absolute truth. We moved into a big house on River Street, facing the Mississippi. It was a 2-story wooden Victorian, one of those old ones, with a wrap-around porch where the breeze blew all day. Orlando Sr. lived in the house next door, the 2 properties connected by a covered walkway. To make visiting easier, Sebastian explained. But they weren't visits. It was an extension of the same house, father and son living as if they were still one. My mother-in-law, Constance, was Orlando Sr.'s second wife, a beautiful woman, much younger than him, from St. Louis. She married when Sebastian was already 20, never able to have children of her own. She was kind to me, but lived in the shadow of the 2 men in the house, more like another piece of furniture than a real person. The first years were a constant honeymoon. Sebastian spoiled me, brought gifts from St. Louis, took me to the best places. I had my first child in 1958, Orlando Jr., a name that didn't even need discussion. It was already decided before he was born. Then came Marina in 1960, Sebastian Jr. in 1962, and my youngest Marianne in 1965. Orlando Sr. was an overly present grandfather. He spent more time at our house than his own. Had coffee with us, lunch, dinner, played with the grandchildren. He had opinions on everything, from the color of the curtains to where to enroll the children. Sebastian never made a decision without consulting his father first. Dad has experience, he'd say. Dad knows what's best. At first, I thought this respect was beautiful. After all, Orlando Sr. had been both father and mother to Sebastian. He deserved consideration. But over the years, I began to realize it wasn't normal respect. It was dependence. It was worship. It was something that went beyond natural and entered unhealthy territory. When Marina was born with a heart problem, the doctors in Canton said she needed surgery in St. Louis. I started packing to travel, But Sebastian stopped me. "Wait for Dad to come back from his fishing trip so we can decide." He came back 3 days later. 3 days my daughter spent suffering. For Orlando Sr. to say the obvious, that we had to go to St. Louis. The family business was doing well. The boat fleet was growing. Trade with St. Louis was profitable. But it was Orlando Sr. who commanded everything. Sebastian was a partner on paper, but in practice was more like an obedient employee. When I suggested he take more initiative, I got a scolding that left me speechless. "Don't meddle where you're not wanted. Dad built this empire. He knows what he's doing." Constance suffered in silence. She saw her husband more interested in his son's life than in his own wife. On a hellishly hot afternoon, I found her crying in the backyard. "It's hard to compete with a ghost," she said, wiping her tears. "The first wife died, but she's still alive in the sun. And now I have to compete for attention with both of them." In 1968, Orlando Sr. had his first high blood pressure crisis. The doctor ordered less salt, less work, fewer worries. Sebastian went crazy. He hired a private nurse, bought a blood pressure monitor, turned the house into a health clinic. He checked his father's pressure 5 times a day, noted everything in a notebook, called the doctor for any minor change. It was during this time that I began to notice changes in my husband's behavior. He got anxious when his father took too long to return from work. He had nightmares where Orlando Sr. died and woke up sweating, crying, hugging me like a scared child. Once I found him in his father's room, smelling the clothes in the closet, crying softly. The September festivals continued to liven up Canton, but our family no longer participated like before. Sebastian didn't want to leave his father alone. What if he has an attack while we're at the fair? Orlando Sr. still tried to argue, said he was fine, but his son wouldn't listen. We stayed home, listening to the music from the fair in the distance, prisoners of Sebastian's irrational fear. 1972 was the year everything began to fall apart. Orlando Sr. had a mild heart attack. He survived, but was weakened. The doctor was categorical. He needed to drastically reduce his activities, pass command of the business on. But pass it to whom? Sebastian didn't have the psychological structure to take over. As soon as his father got sick, he got sick too. Headaches, vomiting, trembling. The children grew up somewhat lost in that environment. Orlando Jr., the eldest, developed a rebellious personality, sneaking out to watch the fair preparations. Marina, with her heart already operated on, but still fragile, was always sick. I think she was internalizing the tension in the house. The 2 youngest adapted to that strange routine, where the grandfather commanded more than the father. Constance died in 1975. Cerebral stroke while sleeping. She didn't suffer. At the funeral, Orlando Sr. cried, but it was contained crying, like someone fulfilling a social obligation. Sebastian cried more for his stepmother than her own husband. After the funeral, Orlando Sr. practically moved into our house. "Just until I get used to the loneliness," he said. But we all knew it would be forever. Orlando Sr.'s health worsened year by year. Diabetes joined the high blood pressure and heart problems. His legs swelled, his vision failed, his reasoning became slow. But Sebastian didn't accept his father's decline. He sought doctors in St. Louis, Chicago, even abroad. We spent fortunes on experimental treatments, miracle drugs, empty promises. In 1978 came the diagnosis that would change everything. Orlando Sr. had Alzheimer's, still early but progressing quickly. The doctor prepared the family. "He'll forget who you are. He'll become like a child again. He may become aggressive, may have hallucinations. It's a cruel disease." Sebastian didn't accept it. "My father has the most brilliant mind I know. This is medical error." He sought other specialists. All confirmed the diagnosis. That's when my husband began to show signs that his own sanity was hanging by a thread. He created an obsessive care routine. He woke up every hour to check if his father was breathing. He recorded conversations to have proof that Orlando Sr. was still lucid. When the old man began to forget names, Sebastian made photo albums, forced his father to look, repeated old stories trying to awaken memories. My mother came to visit me during this time. She still lived in the same small house where I was born, simple but peaceful life. She stayed a week observing our chaotic routine. Before leaving, She pulled me aside. "Daughter, your husband is disturbed. When the old man dies, he's going to lose it completely. Be careful." I tried to reassure her, said it was a difficult phase, but it would pass. Mom shook her head. "There are men who don't know how to live without their father. When they lose their footing, they lose their mind along with it." I didn't pay much attention at the time, but those words kept hammering in my head. The year 1979 began with Orlando Sr., completely dependent. He didn't recognize anyone anymore, called Sebastian various names, confused me with people from the past. He needed help with everything: eating, bathing, using the bathroom. We hired 24-hour nurses, turned the room into a mini hospital. Sebastian wasted away along with his father. He lost 30 pounds, developed nervous tics, talked to himself. He spent sleepless nights by his father's bed, holding his hand, begging for a sign of recognition that never came. The family business was going down the drain, but he didn't care. Only his father mattered. It was on a Sunday in March that I found Sebastian in his father's room, wearing the old man's clothes, looking at himself in the mirror. "I look like him, don't I?" he asked with a strange smile. "Sometimes I think we're the same person." I felt a chill down my spine. It was the harbinger of the storm that was to come. In May, Orlando Sr. had severe pneumonia. The doctors gave up hope. A matter of days, maybe hours, Sebastian went into deep denial. He survived worse. He'll overcome this too. But the 80-year-old body had no more strength. He agonized for 3 days, with his son beside him begging for miracles. He died on a June dawn, the eve of the Canton County Fair. The town was preparing for the festival, but in our house the world had ended. Sebastian held his father's body for hours, wouldn't let anyone approach. "He's just sleeping," he repeated. "Dad always wakes up, always comes back to me." They had to sedate my husband to prepare the body for the wake. During the burial, he seemed like a zombie, empty stare, automatic movements, murmuring disconnected words. When the coffin was lowered into the grave, he tried to jump in after it. The men held him back. He struggled, screamed, cried like a child. We returned home in silence. Sebastian locked himself in his father's former room. He stayed there for hours, not answering when we knocked on the door. It was as if part of him had been buried along with Orlando Sr. The next day, the town exploded in celebration. The county fair took over the streets with red, white, and blue, music echoing everywhere. But our house was a tomb. Sebastian wandered through the rooms like a lost soul, looking for his father in the corners, calling for him. It was on the 3rd day after the burial that the worst happened. I was in the kitchen when I heard screams coming from the neighboring house where Orlando Sr. had lived. I ran to see what it was. The door was open. I went in calling for Sebastian. What I saw in that room haunts me to this day. When I entered Orlando Sr.'s house that June afternoon, the smell of mothballs and medicine still permeated the air. Sebastian was in the master bedroom, wearing his dead father's pajamas, lying on his bed. But that wasn't what froze my blood. It was what he was doing to my mother. Mom had stayed a few more days after the burial to help me. Too good a heart, as she always was. She was there, huddled in the corner of the room, her dress torn, red marks on her neck, crying softly while my husband, completely deranged, shouted that she was Donna Fatima, Orlando Sr.'s first wife, dead more than 30 years ago. "Come back to me, Fatima," he bellowed, his eyes glazed, not seeing reality. "I know you faked your death to run away with that traveling salesman. But now Orlando's dead. We can be together." I ran to help my mother. Sebastian pushed me with a force I never thought he had. I hit my back on the dresser, knocking down old picture frames. The noise seemed to awaken something in him. He looked at me confused, then at my mother on the floor, as if he didn't understand what was happening. "Anna?" He called my name for the first time in days. What did I do? I helped Mom get up. She was shaking all over, could barely stand. The mark of his hands on her neck was already starting to bruise. But the worst was her eyes, the terror mixed with pity, like someone seeing a fierce animal that isn't to blame for being a beast. "Come, Mom," I said, holding her firmly. "Let's go to our house." Sebastian tried to follow us, but I locked the door. He stayed outside, knocking, crying, begging forgiveness for something he didn't even remember doing. I took Mom to my room, cleaned her wounds, gave her sugar water to calm her down. "You need to have him committed, daughter," Mom said when she could speak. "This man has lost his mind for good. Today it was me, tomorrow it could be you, or worse, one of the children." I knew she was right. But how to commit your own husband? In 1979, mental hospitals were for the completely insane, for people who drooled and ate flies. The nearest psychiatric hospital was in St. Louis, and the shame of having a husband committed was something that marked a family forever. That night, I locked my mother and the children in the room with me. Sebastian spent the dawn wandering around the house, talking to ghosts. I heard him calling his father's first wife, people dead for decades. Sometimes he laughed, sometimes he cried, sometimes he shouted nonsense. In the morning, I found him sleeping on the porch, hugging a portrait of Orlando Sr. He looked so vulnerable, so lost. For a moment I felt sorry. That broken man wasn't the Sebastian I knew, who wrote me love poems, who gave me 4 children. He was just an empty shell looking for pieces of himself. I called Dr. Agenor, the family doctor, for years. He examined Sebastian, asked questions that my husband answered with delusions. He said his father had turned into a bird, that he came back every day to talk. He said his real mother, Donna Fatima, was hiding in the attic waiting for the right moment to appear. "Mrs. Anna," the doctor called me aside. "Your husband has had a severe psychotic break. His father's death triggered something that was probably already latent. He needs specialized treatment, strong medication, maybe hospitalization." "For how long?" I asked, already knowing I didn't want to hear the answer. "Impossible to say. Could be weeks, months. There are cases that never fully recover." The weight of those words fell on me like winter rain. 4 children to raise, family business sinking, a husband who had become a stranger in his own home. How to hold so much misfortune alone. I tried home treatment first. Dr. Agenor prescribed strong sedatives, antipsychotics that left Sebastian drugged, but controlled. I hired a nurse to help, a strong man in case we needed to contain crises. But the medications only masked the problem. One afternoon, Sebastian woke from sedation, more agitated than ever. He managed to leave the room, went straight to the kitchen where Marina, my middle daughter, was making coffee. She was 17, long hair like mine, features that reminded me of him when he was young. "Constance!" he shouted when he saw her, confusing our daughter with Orlando Sr.'s late second wife. "Come home! Orlando's waiting for you!" Marina tried to run, but he was faster. He grabbed her by the arms, shook her hard. "Why did you run away? Why did you abandon him?" The girl screamed, terrified. I ran when I heard the screams. When I got to the kitchen, Sebastian had Marina cornered against the wall. His hands on her neck, squeezing, eyes unfocused, lost in some delusion from the past. I grabbed the first thing I found, an iron pan, and hit his head with all the strength I had. He fell unconscious. Marina coughed, cried, hugged me, trembling all over. I looked at my husband lying on the floor, a trickle of blood running from his temple. And for the first time I thought it would be better if he didn't wake up. But he did wake up, 2 hours later, confused, not remembering anything. He looked at the wound in the mirror, asked what had happened. When I told him, he cried like a child. He asked for forgiveness on his knees, swore he would never hurt anyone again, begged me not to abandon him. "I need help, Anna," he sobbed. "I can't control what happens. It's like other people take over my body, do things I would never do." That night, I made the hardest decision of my life. I called the psychiatric hospital in St. Louis, scheduled admission. I packed a small suitcase with basic clothes, hygiene products, the photo of our wedding that he liked so much. "It'll be for a short time," I lied when I told him about the hospitalization. "Just until you get over this crisis." He accepted, resigned, like a lamb going to slaughter. On the boat to St. Louis, he stayed quiet, watching the river pass. Sometimes he murmured disconnected things about Orlando Sr., turning into a catfish, about needing to come back soon to take care of his father. The hospital was a gray building on the outskirts of the city. Bars on the windows, high walls, prison atmosphere. At reception, I filled out endless forms. Family history, symptoms, episodes of violence. Each question was a stab to my pride, a confirmation that my life had collapsed. I said goodbye to him in the inner courtyard. Other patients wandered around, some talking to themselves, others standing like statues. Sebastian hugged me tight, like a child afraid of the first day of school. "Come back soon to get me," he asked. "Promise you won't be long." "I promise," I lied again. Because deep down, I already knew I might never be able to bring back the man I knew. I returned to Canton with a heavy heart. The children asked about their father. I made up that he had traveled on business. Marina said nothing. The trauma of the near strangulation left her silent on the subject. She just hugged me tighter at night, as if needing to be sure she was safe. The months passed slowly. I called the hospital every week, always the same answer. Patient stable, but without significant improvement. I visited twice. The first time, Sebastian recognized me, cried, begged to come back. The second time, he called me Fatima the whole time, asked if I had brought Orlando to visit. Money ran out quickly. Private hospital cost a fortune, imported medicines even more. I sold boats from the company, fired employees, did what I could to maintain expenses, but it was like trying to empty the river with a leaky bucket. That's when I discovered the debts. Sebastian had taken hidden loans in the last months, signed promissory notes, given boats as collateral, all to pay for miraculous treatments for his already dying father. Creditors began to appear, stern men with contracts in hand, veiled threats of eviction. My older brother, John, came from Chicago to help. A trained lawyer, he knew the laws. He examined the contracts, shook his head discouraged. "Anna, you're going to lose everything. House, boats, even the furniture." Sebastian mortgaged the impossible. Despair is too little to describe what I felt. 4 children depending on me. A husband hospitalized with no prediction of improvement. Unpayable debts knocking at the door. I cried until I dried up, prayed until I lost my voice, begged for divine help that didn't seem to come. On a sleepless dawn, sitting on the porch watching the river, I had a cruel epiphany. Orlando Sr. had left life insurance. Considerable value, enough to pay off debts and have some left over. But the beneficiary was Sebastian, and with him hospitalized as incompetent, the money was stuck in bureaucratic limbo. That's when the devil whispered in my ear. If Sebastian died, the insurance would pass to me as his wife. The debts would be paid. The children would have a future. The nightmare would end. It just needed an accident. An overdose of medication, a fall down the stairs, a drowning in the river. I pushed away the sinful thought. How could I consider killing the father of my children? But the idea kept coming back, insistent, every time a creditor knocked at the door, every time I saw the despair in the children's eyes. It was then that I received my mother's last visit. She was older, more stooped, but her eyes still sharp. She stayed a week observing our ordeal. On the eve of leaving, she took me for a walk along the river. "Daughter," she began slowly, "there are snakes you kill by stepping on them. Others need a machete. Sebastian has become a poisonous snake. If you leave him alive, he'll end up biting everyone." I looked at her scared. Mom had always been religious, God-fearing. Hearing that from her was like seeing a saint blaspheme. "I'm not saying to do anything," she continued. "Just saying that sometimes God understands that we need to be instruments of our own salvation. David killed Goliath, Judith beheaded Holofernes. Sometimes violence is justice in disguise." She left the next day, but the words stayed. Fermenting, growing, taking shape. The more I resisted, the more logical the idea seemed. A crazy man, violent, who almost killed his own daughter. A dead weight sucking resources that the children needed. A constant threat of coming back worse than he was. Hell must be full of good intentions, and mine paved the way for what happened next. But that I'll tell next. I need to breathe a bit, take a sip of water. Reliving these memories is like opening an old wound. It hurts even after it's healed. They say conscience is the worst executioner there is. Well, mine tormented me for weeks after that conversation with Mom. I slept badly, ate worse, lost 20 pounds in a month. The children asked what was wrong. I made up excuses. Missing their father, worry about money, accumulated tiredness. June 1980 arrived with the colors of the festival exploding in Canton. The town pulsed red, white, and blue, music echoing day and night, but our house remained gray. The debts increased, creditors became more aggressive. One day they even put up an auction notice on the door. The house would be sold at public auction if we didn't pay within 30 days. Marina didn't leave her room anymore. The trauma of her father's attack developed into panic syndrome. Any loud noise made her tremble, cry, hide in the closet. Orlando Jr. took on the posture of man of the house at 22, dropped out of college to try to save what was left of the business. But it was too late. The canoe company was rotten from the inside. It was on a Thursday that I received the letter from the hospital. Sebastian had gotten worse. He needed more intensive treatment, experimental drugs, electric shock therapy. The cost would triple. They asked for an urgent decision: continue expensive treatment or transfer to the public ward of the asylum where poor lunatics rotted forgotten. I sat on the bed holding that paper, my head throbbing. How to explain to the children that their father would be thrown in with indigents because we had no more money? How to look in the mirror knowing I let this happen? How to live with the shame of having a husband in the pauper's asylum? That night, I went to the main church. Father Joseph, an old acquaintance, heard my confession without saying anything. I cried, begged for divine guidance, searched the scriptures for an answer that didn't come. The priest, wise in his 70 years, only said, "Sometimes God allows us to pass through the valley of shadow to test our faith. What matters is not the darkness, but how we come out of it." I returned home without answers, but with something forming in my chest. It was no longer despair. It was cold determination. If God wasn't going to provide a miracle, I would provide the solution myself, even if I had to irreversibly dirty my hands to do it. I began to research, discreetly, in the dead hours. I read about poisons that leave no trace, accidents that seem natural, sudden deaths without explanation. The municipal library had medical books, chemistry, even first aid manuals that taught, between the lines, how to cause definitive aid. I discovered that certain plants along the Mississippi were lethal in specific doses, that mixing psychiatric drugs with alcohol caused accidental cardiac arrest, that drowning in a sedated person was practically undetectable. Morbid information that I noted in code, hidden in the sewing room. The plan matured slowly. It couldn't be in Canton, a small town where everyone knew our story. It had to be in St. Louis during a visit to the hospital. Tragic accident during therapeutic outing. The Mississippi River was deep, current strong. How many didn't drown every year? I scheduled a visit for July. I told the children I would try a new conversation with doctors about cheaper treatment. I prepared a bag with light clothes, documents, and in a secret compartment, a bottle of strong liquid sedative left over from home treatments. The boat trip took 12 hours. I stayed on deck, watching the river pass, mentally rehearsing every detail. I would arrive at the hospital, convince doctors to release Sebastian for a supervised outing. Fresh air is good, I would argue. We would go to the riverfront, a public place, but with isolated stretches. The rest would be a matter of opportunity and courage. St. Louis welcomed me with asphalt-cracking heat. I took the bus to the hospital, sweating cold inside, fire outside. At reception, I filled out forms, showed documents, smiled at nurses like the dedicated wife I was. Lies have short legs, but mine only needed a few hours. Sebastian was in the intermediate ward. Not the worst, but far from well. When he saw me, he had a moment of lucidity. "Anna, you came." He hugged me like a drowning man hugs a plank. For an instant, I wavered. This was the man I had loved, father of my children, companion of 2 decades. But then he looked over my shoulder and asked, "Where's Dad? Did he come with you?" The lucidity was gone as quickly as it came. I spent 3 hours listening to delusions about Orlando Sr. being alive, living at the bottom of the river, sending messages through enchanted catfish. The doctor in charge, Dr. Cerquera, was a tired man who had already seen too much. I explained about the financial situation, begged for alternatives. He was honest. Without proper treatment, he'll vegetate. With treatment, maybe he'll improve in a few years. Maybe. Can I take him for a walk? I asked casually. It's been months since he's seen the sun properly. Dr. Cerqueira hesitated, consulted the file. Sebastian wasn't considered dangerous, just disturbed. With proper supervision, 2 hours maximum, signed the liability waiver. I signed with a firm hand a death sentence disguised as an outing. Mortal sin camouflaged as an act of mercy. I helped Sebastian change from hospital pajamas to street clothes. He was thin, bearded, smelling of medicine and hopelessness. But he smiled, happy with the temporary freedom. I took a taxi to the Mississippi riverfront. Dry season exposed beaches, but water remained deep meters out. Tourists took photos, street vendors offered coconut water, children played in the sand. Perfect setting for tragedy to seem like accident. We sat on a bench under an oak tree. Sebastian talked nonstop about childhood with Orlando Sr., fishing trips on the river, saints' festivals he didn't even remember properly. I bought coconut water, waited for the right moment to add sedative. But my hand trembled, conscience screamed, heart raced. You know I dreamed about you yesterday? He said suddenly, lucid. We were young again, dancing the square dance at the June festival. You wore that checkered dress your mother sewed, remember? I remembered. First festival we went to together, still dating. He had stepped on my foot during the dance, apologized 1,000 times, bought cotton candy to make up for it. We were happy then. Future ahead, love in our eyes. The memory broke me. I started crying, sobbing, shaking all over. Sebastian hugged me awkwardly, confused by my despair. Don't cry, Annie. Everything will be fine. Dad always said God takes care of those who love each other. It was the mention of Orlando Sr. that brought me back to the present. I remembered Marina trembling in the closet, Mom with purple marks on her neck, house mortgaged, children without future. Love had transformed into chains, binding us all to a mental patient who would never get better. I stood up determined. Let's walk a bit. He agreed happily, pleased with the simple program. We went to the most isolated stretch of beach, where large rocks created natural pools at low tide. Perfect place, deep water right there, strong current, few witnesses. Look, dolphin! Sebastian pointed to the middle of the river. There was no dolphin, but I pretended to see. It was the cue I was waiting for. When he leaned to see better, I reached for the bottle in my pocket. Just pour it into his mouth during some distraction, wait for drowsiness, help him slip on the wet rocks. But my hand remained paralyzed. Devil whispered, "Do it now." Angel shouted, "Don't kill." Conscience debated between the two. Cold sweat ran down my back. Wobbly legs barely held my body. "Anna, are you okay?" Sebastian noticed my state. "You're pale, trembling. Better sit down." He led me back to the bench, sat beside me, put his arm around my shoulders. For a moment he forgot his madness, was just a husband taking care of his wife. The unexpected tenderness completely disarmed me. "I can't do this," I murmured. "Do what?" "Nothing. My delusion." We stayed there until the sun began to set. He fell asleep on my shoulder, peaceful breathing of someone who carries no guilt. I looked at the bottle in my pocket one last time. Then I took it and threw it in the river. I watched it sink, taking with it the diabolical plan I almost executed. We returned to the hospital in the late afternoon. I returned Sebastian to the nurses, signed papers, thanked them for the opportunity. Dr. Cerqueira informed that the following week he would be transferred to the public ward due to lack of payment. I agreed resignedly. I wouldn't kill my husband, but I also couldn't pay for impossible treatment. I said goodbye with a kiss on the forehead. He smiled, waved, returned to his inner ghosts. I left the hospital with heavy soul, but clean conscience. Or almost clean. The almost would kill my sleep for years, but it was a small price compared to what I almost did. I returned to Canton on the night boat. Stars reflected on the dark river, cold wind cut the skin. I thought about jumping, ending everything at once, but I remembered the children waiting at home. They weren't to blame for their parents' sins. When I arrived, I found Orlando Jr. on the porch. "Mom, we need to talk." The tone was too serious for my liking. I prepared for more bad news. New creditor, new debt, new disgrace. but what he said changed everything. I discovered something about Grandpa Orlando, something that could solve our problems, but it's complicated, maybe even dangerous. Are you willing to listen? I looked at my eldest son, so similar to his father before the madness, determined, protective, willing to do anything for the family. Maybe salvation would come through paths I hadn't imagined. Maybe the miracle had another name. Tell me, I replied, preparing for the next twist in this story that seemed to have no end. Because life is like that. When you think you've hit rock bottom, we discover you can always dig deeper. Or then, with luck, find the ladder that was there all along, just waiting for someone brave enough to climb. Orlando Jr. took me to Orlando Sr.'s old office. Drawers ransacked, papers scattered, signs he'd spent days searching for something. He lit a kerosene lamp, lack of payment had cut off the electricity, and began to explain. Mom, Grandpa wasn't the saint everyone thought he was. I found contracts, receipts, letters. He ran a loan sharking scheme for decades, lent money at extortionist rates, took properties from those who couldn't pay. There are people who lost everything to him. I took the papers with trembling hands. Contracts with shaky signatures from illiterates, 50% monthly interest, properties confiscated for small debts. The canoe fortune had rotten roots. There's more, Orlando continued. Constance, his second wife. She didn't die of a stroke. I found a letter from her hidden in a book saying she was going to run away because the old man beat her. She disappeared the day before she died. Closed casket. Nobody saw the body. I think he faked her death to avoid the shame of a runaway wife. The revelation left me dizzy. Constance alive? So that funeral? That mourning? All lies? The memories reorganized themselves. Sebastian crying more than his father-in-law. Sealed casket because of the condition of the body. Unusual rush for burial. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, still processing. Because I found out where she is. Constance lives in Chicago, changed her name, remarried, and she has proof of everything the old man did. If she comes forward, the inheritance can be contested. Dad's debts might be annulled if we prove the money was dirty. It's our chance. Hope lit up quickly, but went out even faster. She won't want to get involved. She fled years ago, rebuilt her life. Why would she come back? Orlando smiled. A smile I didn't like. Looked like his father when planning something. Because we'll make her an offer she can't refuse. Either she helps, or we reveal to everyone that she's alive. Bigamy is a crime. Her new life falls apart. That's blackmail, I protested weakly. It's survival. Would you rather see the family on the street? Marina traumatized? The little ones without education? Sometimes you need to get your hands dirty to protect those we love, my mother's words echoed. Sometimes violence is justice in disguise. Maybe I didn't need to kill anyone. Maybe the violence was just psychological, as cruel as, but without blood on my hands. We traveled to Chicago the following week. Orlando had investigated. Constance lived as Frances Malone, married to a prosperous merchant, 2 teenage children. Nice house in an upscale neighborhood, comfortable life, buried past. When we knocked on the door, a maid answered, said the lady didn't receive without appointment. Orlando showed an old photo, Constance next to Orlando Sr. Forced smile of an unhappy woman. Tell her it's about her first husband. She'll want to receive us. Minutes later, we were in the luxurious living room. Constance entered slowly, aged but recognizable. When she saw the photo in Orlando's hand, she lost color. Sat heavily in the armchair. I always knew this day would come, she whispered. What do you want? I explained the situation. Sebastian insane, unpayable debts, children without future. She listened silently, tears flowing discreetly. When I mentioned the documents Orlando found, she perked up. I have worse proof, she revealed. His diary confessing crimes, photos of women he used as debt payment. I hid it before running, in case I needed to defend myself. Never imagined it would serve for this. Will you help us? I asked, hopeful. She hesitated, looked at the door where teenagers' laughter came from the kitchen. Her new children, who didn't know the previous mother. If I do this, my life here ends. My husband doesn't know about the past. The children think I'm a widow from my first marriage. How to explain that I faked my own death? You don't need to tell everything, Orlando argued. Just that you were married before, fled from a violent husband. Documents prove his crimes. Don't mention the fake death. She pondered at length, finally, sighed resignedly. I spent 20 years afraid of him finding me. Now that he's dead, maybe it's time to bury the ghost for good. But there are conditions. The conditions were simple. Her identity preserved to the maximum. Lawsuit would be filed by us using evidence provided by anonymous source. No contact after delivering documents. We agreed to everything. 3 days later, she appeared at the hotel with a heavy briefcase. Inside, treasure more valuable than gold. Parallel accounting notebooks, illegal contracts, confessions written in Orlando Sr.'s own hand. Even compromising photos of him with various women, some clearly underage. I never told anyone this, Constance said, handing over the briefcase. But he was a monster. It started subtle, jealousy, control. Then came physical violence. When he threatened to lend my body to pay off a client's debt, I ran, left everything, changed everything, lived in hiding for years. I hugged that brave woman who shared with me the pain of having been property of a cruel man. We promised never to reveal her location, never to seek her again. She left relieved, ghosts from the past finally exorcised. Back in Canton, I sought Dr. Raymond Neves, the best lawyer in town. He examined the documents, eyes widening with each page. This is pure dynamite. Orlando Sr. was a career criminal. With this evidence, many debts are voidable. And more, the state may have to pay compensation for complicity. Sheriffs, judges, everyone knew and did nothing. The lawsuit was filed in August 1980. The whole town boiled with scandal. Families harmed by Orlando Sr. appeared in droves. Widows who lost homes, orphans left without inheritance, merchants bankrupted by loan sharking. Saint Orlando Sr. became Demon Orlando Sr. overnight. Sebastian's debts began to fall one by one. Judges annulled contracts, considered payments as restitution for previous thefts. Creditors who were Orlando Sr.'s accomplices disappeared, afraid of being sued too. In October, major victory. State recognized partial responsibility, paid substantial compensation for authorities' omission in face of continuing crimes. Enough money to pay off remaining debt and have capital left to start over. But I wanted more than money. I wanted poetic justice. During investigations, I discovered Orlando Sr. had a secret house where he took lovers. Remote place, creekside, nobody knew it was his. It had been abandoned since his death, overtaken by vegetation. One dawn, I went there alone. Ruined house, but solid structure. Inside, dusty furniture, double bed with rotted sheets, place of sin awaiting penance. I had an idea that seemed like divine message, or diabolical. Hard to distinguish when desperation guides actions. I returned the next day with gallons of gasoline. Spreading flammable liquid was purification ritual. Each room received its dose, each piece of furniture its portion of fuel. Lastly, the bed where Orlando Sr. defiled desperate women. I lit the match with steady hand. I didn't tremble anymore, didn't hesitate. I threw it on the bed and watched fire birth, grow, devour. In minutes, the whole house burned. Flames licked the night sky, smoke rose like offering to vengeful gods. I watched from afar. Wood crackled, tiles fell, structure collapsed. With it burned Orlando Sr.'s rotten legacy. Ashes to wind, sins turning to smoke, bad memories dissolving in air. When firefighters arrived, only embers remained. They said it was spontaneous combustion. Old house, dry wood, spark from distant lightning. Nobody investigated much. After all, it was just abandoned ruin of dead and dishonored owner. But for me it was more. It was symbolic cremation of years of suffering. Sebastian never accidentally set fire to the real house or out of madness. But I voluntarily burned temple of perversion. Justice has many faces, and that night I showed mine. December brought the last card. Sebastian would be transferred to public asylum soon. I went to visit him. Decision made about his future. I found a withered, finished man. Madness had consumed what little remained. He didn't recognize anyone, talked to the dead, saw ghosts in every corner. Doctors said deterioration was irreversible. It would be better if God took him. Dr. Cerqueira commented without realizing the weight of his words. He's suffering without even knowing he suffers. Family suffering by extension. Sometimes death is mercy. I agreed silently. But God seemed deaf to requests, or maybe waiting for me to be instrument of my own prayer. On the eve of transfer to the asylum, I made a last visit. Sebastian was sedated, sleeping restlessly. The nurse informed that calming doses had been increased. Very agitated patient lately. I was left alone with him in the room. Man I loved, who gave me children, who made me suffer. Empty shell, where soul had already departed long ago. Difficult breathing from so much medicine. Tired heart from carrying useless body. I took the extra pillow from the bed next to his. I didn't plan, didn't think. Hands acted alone, guided by mercy or evil. I placed it over his face, pressed with strength of decades of accumulated pain. He didn't fight. Too sedated to react, too weak to resist. Seconds that seemed like hours until breathing stopped. Body relaxed. Torment finally ended. I removed the pillow, put it back in place. Arranged his body, closed eyes that were already closed. Kissed cold forehead in a farewell that should have happened years before. I called the nurse. I think he's gone. He was sleeping, stopped breathing. She checked vital signs, confirmed death. Doctor came, examined superficially. Cardiac arrest, common in patients with so much medication. Nobody questioned. Nobody investigated. Crazy man dies, world keeps spinning. Death certificate. Natural death from heart failure. Pious lie for cruel truth. Died from mercy of tired wife. We buried Sebastian next to the father he loved so much. Poetic justice. Together in death as they were in life. Children cried. I dried tears that didn't come. Mourning on the outside, relief inside. Weight I'd carried for years, finally in the coffin. Priest prayed about forgiven sins. Promised eternal life. I wondered if it included merciful murder, if God understands desperation of woman at the limit. Answer will come at my own final judgment. But that day, returning from cemetery, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. House saved, children safe, future possible. Price paid in blood and fire, heavy conscience but protected family. Sometimes violence is justice in disguise. Sometimes death is liberation. Sometimes woman needs to be executioner to stop being victim. I'm not proud of what I did, but I'd do it again. Because between sainthood and survival, I chose to live. And I lived. The day after Sebastian's burial was the first day of my new life. I woke without the weight of fear, without the anguish of asylum visits, without impossible debts knocking at the door. For the first time in years, the sun coming through the window seemed to really illuminate, not just brighten. Marina was the first to notice the change. "Mom's different," she commented at breakfast. "Seems lighter." If she knew how much that lightness cost, maybe she wouldn't find it so beautiful. But children don't need to carry their parents' sins. Each generation deserves its chance at innocence. With money from the state compensation and sale of some recovered properties, I reorganized life. First, psychological treatment for Marina. I found a psychologist in St. Louis specialized in trauma, took her once a month. Gradually, my girl started smiling again, leaving her room, living. Orlando Jr. resumed his studies. I sent him to New York, law school at a good public university. "I want you to be an honest lawyer," I said at farewell, "to use the law to protect, not exploit." He understood the message, hugged tight, promised to honor the family name the right way. The two youngest continued in Canton, but in private school now. Pressed uniform, complete materials, lunch that wasn't just cornmeal mush, small luxuries that seemed like miracles after so much deprivation. I reopened some canoe family businesses, but differently. No loan sharking, exploitation, predatory contracts. Boats did honest transport, fair prices, dignified treatment of river people. I tried to clean the name Orlando Sr. had sullied for decades. 1982 brought the county fair's 75th anniversary. For the first time since Sebastian's madness, we really participated. I wore red, white, and blue with pride, took the children to the stands, sang songs until dawn. Marina danced for the first time in years, twirling in a dress she chose herself. It was at this festival that I met Mrs. Rachel Taylor, strong 60-year-old woman, widow for 10 years, raised 6 children alone selling crafts. We sat together in the stands, started talking. She told me her husband died in a river accident, drunk, violent, fell from the boat on a dark night. Nobody saw him fall, she said with a meaningful look. But everyone saw the marks he left on me. When they found the body, the whole town pretended sadness. I pretended more than everyone. I understood between the lines. How many of us, women of the Mississippi Valley, carried similar secrets? How many relieved widows? How many providential accidents? How many justice by our own hands? We became friends. Rachel introduced me to other women, seamstresses, washerwomen, teachers, merchants, all with stories of overcoming, some with secrets whispered only among equals. We formed an informal group, met for coffee, embroidery, conversation. We called it the Quilting Circle, but it was more than that. It was a support network, mutual protection, silent solidarity. When a woman with a black eye appeared at the market, one of us approached, offered help. When a violent husband mysteriously disappeared, nobody asked questions. 1985 arrived with democracy returning to America. Hope in the air, possible changes. Marina married a good boy, son of a Portuguese merchant. I threw a beautiful but discreet party. Excesses attract envy. Envy attracts misfortune. At the wedding, my mother appeared. 80 years on her back, still lucid, still perceptive. She pulled me aside during the party. "Are you at peace now, daughter?" she asked, looking into my eyes. "I am, Mom. I did what I needed to." She nodded slowly. "A woman's secret is a man's grave. Keep it well kept." She died the following year, took to the grave any suspicion about Sebastian's end. Years passed. Orlando Jr. graduated, returned to Canton, opened an office, defended just causes, helped the poor, fought loan sharks like his grandfather had been. Redemption through work, cleansing of the family name. Marina had 3 beautiful children, never told her husband about her father's trauma, created healthy family on foundation of necessary silence. The other children also followed their own paths: teacher, doctor, honest merchant. I continued with small businesses, helping with the Quilting Circle, being a present grandmother. But mainly, I became unofficial counselor to women in difficult situations. How many came to cry in my kitchen, tell about violent husbands, show hidden bruises? I always offered herbal tea, sugar cookies, friendly shoulder. And sometimes, just sometimes, when the case was extreme, when there was no legal way out, I whispered ancient knowledge about river plants, tides, accidents that happen. I never directly encouraged, just shared information like cake recipe passed between friends. What each did with knowledge was personal decision, individual weight. But curiously, Canton had a surge of relieved widows in the 80s and 90s. 2003 brought discussions about the Violence Against Women Act. Too late for my generation, but hope for the new ones. I participated in lectures, meetings, campaigns, spoke in general terms about domestic violence, never citing personal case. Some truths are too heavy to share with strangers. I turned 80 in 2018. Big party, family reunited, great-grandchildren running around the house. In the middle of celebration, Marina pulled me aside. "Mom, sometimes I have nightmares about Dad that day. Do you know what really—" I cut her off gently. "Your father was very sick, daughter. He suffered too much, finally rested. That's all that matters to remember." She didn't insist. Some doors are better left closed. Now, in 2024, at 86, I look back without heavy regrets. I did what was necessary to protect family, helped other women find strength, built dignified life on rubble of tragedy. If the price was staining my soul, I preferred dirty soul to dead body or destroyed family. But why tell now? Why expose secrets kept for decades? Because I receive daily messages. young women trapped in abusive relationships, suffering in silence, seeing no way out. They think they're weak, that they deserve to suffer, that there's no alternative. They need to hear there's always a choice, even if difficult, even if extreme. I'm not encouraging violence. Today there are laws, specialized police stations, protection that didn't exist. But for those who live daily terror, who fear for their children's lives, who exhausted legal resources, I want them to know others survived before them. That feminine strength sometimes needs to be brutal to be effective. Each story is unique. Each woman knows the size of her desperation. I just tell mine to say, you're not alone. Generations of us went through hell and came out alive. Some with dirty hands, heavy conscience, eternal secrets. But alive. And in the end, living is what matters. If this story touched you, if you or someone you know needs strength to leave an abusive situation, don't give up. Seek help, report, fight. And if the law fails, if the system abandons you, if danger is greater than protection, remember that survival isn't a crime. It's instinct. It's right. It's justice. Leave your comments saying where you're watching from. Each message shows me that this chain of feminine strength continues, crosses borders, connects women who never met but share similar pains. Like the video, if you believe every woman deserves to live without fear. Subscribe to Grandparents' Tales to follow more real stories of overcoming. Because in the end, that's what we are. Warriors. With war wrinkles, battle-white hair, fighting calloused hands. But warriors, survivors, winners. May God forgive our necessary sins. May the Virgin Mary understand our impossible choices. And may each woman watching find her own strength, her own path, her own liberation. Amen, my dears. Until the next video. And remember, you're stronger than you imagine. Always were, always will be.